Okay, so far we've talked about leveraging the experience you do have, but what if you need more? What if there's a job where there's something that they're looking for and you just don't really have that, but you really want the job? So what are you going to do? How do you get that experience in a way that doesn't involve you getting a job? Well, luckily there's a lot of ways. Now, most people, I want you to recognize this. You're not starting from absolutely zero. You have not just been in your house studying one subject for your entire life. That isn't how that worked. Even going through school, you've gone through multiple different courses. You have something, but it's always useful to gain more experience. Now, in order to do that, maybe you're not even sure what you want to do with this job. You know you want a job, you want to search for a job, but you don't really know what it is. Well, then try to align it with what you enjoy doing. Because a lot of the times our hobbies or our interests, they may not morph directly into a job, but they're going to be things we want to be able to do as we get paid for it. So for example, if you enjoy programming, then you might look for a job where programming is either something you can do or something that you'll be working with. So you might be working with programmers in maybe an HR role so that you can still stay on top of that industry even though you yourself aren't programming. A lot of students have things they call side projects. And you don't have to be a student to have a side project, but I do find that most of my students come in and say, well, what should my side project be? Well, your side project should be the thing that you're most interested in. Now, what is a side project? It's something you work on your own, maybe after school. Maybe you are already working and you want to increase your employability. So something you work on your own that's a little bit more professional than a hobby, but realistically, you know that you're not going to really try to turn this into a business most of the time. Some people do, and it's amazing to do that, but for the most part, it's just a hobby where you're trying to gain skills at the same time. This is like a long-term passion, and you can turn it into your experience. One piece of advice I have for you is to try to use the techniques from the industry you want to work in. So as an example, if you want to be a game programmer, go and build your own game. And then to use the techniques from the industry, well, maybe you want to work in the Unity engine, so go and learn Unity. The idea is to turn that interesting hobby that you want to work on for a long time on a large project into something where you can say the industry does this, I've done this, I have the experience. Another example is to maybe you want an art job, and so you're going to create a bunch of digital art using Photoshop because you want to learn that anyway. That's your side project. Now include that digital portfolio in your application package. Extra training. So a lot of people are on online training websites like this one. So how can you leverage that because you've gone through all these courses? Sometimes it can be online. Sometimes it can just be the formal school. Maybe you've gone and you've taken an interesting course taken at a school. Maybe you've taken some workshops. The key though is you need to sell it right. It's that repeated beat again. It's not about you. So let's think about two different ways to talk about working on a Skillshare course, for example. So let's say I want a big data job. That is to say I want to analyze very large data sets. I could say, well, I took numerous Skillshare courses on big data. That certainly tells people you've experienced a little bit of training, but it doesn't really make much sense because it doesn't tell them what they're looking for. Let's try to tailor that. Now, in this case, maybe the company is looking for a Python programmer for big data, so this is where I tailored that from. But if it isn't, then maybe you need to look for a different course if you took that Python course. So instead of just, well, I took the course, say, I learned big data analysis in Python via self-study and personal projects, culminating in the analysis of the heart arrhythmia dataset. My code is available on GitHub. And then you should be providing a link, part of a digital portfolio, so they can go and look at the code. One piece of very important advice, if you put something like code or a digital portfolio, maybe of your art that people can see, you should probably make sure it's at a very high and professional level. So if you're using bad coding practices, for example, or your art isn't exactly what you want people to see, maybe don't post it. But the difference here between these two ways of saying it is I'm not changing my experience. I'm not lying about it. I'm giving them more information and things they want to see. A lot of people are part of clubs, and clubs are fantastic places to get that experience. Some people are in student clubs, others are in professional clubs. Now, there are great ways to go about it. Sometimes, if you're working in a club that has a very particular mission, for example, a robotics club that is trying to build a robot, then that can directly translate into experience if you're applying for robotics jobs. Maybe you were on the executive. Maybe you were the treasurer, for example. Now again, it's not about you. So it doesn't matter you were the treasurer. It matters that the company needs someone who can handle finances. And so when you say you were a treasurer, make sure that you're using their words to show how your experience in that club can get you the job you want. But if you do have experience in clubs, then consider that you should be putting that on your resume, providing it's relevant. Hobbies are an interesting one. Sometimes people delegate their hobbies to the very bottom of the resume just to look like a well-rounded person. And that's not something I recommend that you do. If the hobbies aren't relevant to the job, then maybe you need that real estate in your resume for something else. But what if they are? So let's think about how a lot of people can find their dream job by starting it as a hobby. Even if you don't do that, some people have hobbies that are very, very relevant and helpful in their job. Now, I once reached out to someone who was in an industry that aligned well with my hobbies, and I asked that person, well, I do this at home. How much of that transfers to working in the industry? And he gave me a very fascinating response. He said, if given the option between a hobbyist and someone who's never done it before, I'll take the hobbyist. But you have to notice that the difference between a hobby and the job is the same as the difference between a remote control car and driving yourself across the country. A lot of things are very similar. You have things, for example, like navigating and turning and driving forward and going backwards and that sort of thing. But the skill set that you gain at home is small scale. Not all of it is transferable, and you have to recognize that. So even if you are a fantastic person in your hobby field, you still probably need to gain more experience when you're on the job. As you have this hobby, try to learn industry-specific techniques and use your hobby to do those things. So as an example, if you're interested in digital art, then you can turn that hobby into a career by first learning Photoshop inside and out. And suddenly when you have a job description that says we're looking for someone who knows Photoshop, you can say, yeah, I have 4 years of experience working with this. I wasn't paid for that experience, but look at my digital portfolio. Look at how good I am at this program, just by doing something you love doing. So now think about how many of these things do you already have? How can you put them into your resume in an impactful way? Just remember, it's not about you. It's about showing them that you can do what they want.